Okay. Um, so I'm going to call to order the June 30th, 2025 meeting of the full advisory board, almost full. Um, and I will take a roll call. I'm looking at my screen. Peter,
Present.
Dan, I am here. Linda,
Here.
John, I see you.
Here.
Emily,
Hello.
hi. And Scott, you're a
Here.
blank screen.
Yeah.
There you are. Good.
My video is not working for some reason. I'm away from the office.
That's okay. We know what you look like.
Thank you.
Aaron
Here.
and Elizabeth. Okay. I don't see Lee. I don't see Patrick. I think Patrick was going to be on vacation starting today, so he may not be here either.
He told us he
Did
couldn't,
I'm sorry?
he told us he couldn't make it.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you, Shannon. All right. Second order of business is to approve the minutes. And Patrick was the clerk for that on the June 23rd. Do we have those to approve? We do. Okay. Does anybody have any comments? Oh, Linda.
Uh, there was a space in the minutes for dropping in some comments with regard to the exercise that we did. And so I don't know if we actually can approve them. Shannon, have they been revised?
So really all I was doing, Justina compiled some of the comments into the slide deck. And now the slide deck is linked online, so I can just plug that link in and the comments are there.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So, is that, so we comfortable, Shannon, with approving them as per that amendment? Okay. Okay. I would entertain a motion to do so.
So move, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. Second.
Second.
Great. Thanks, John. All right. Roll call vote. Peter,
Aye.
Dan, I, Linda,
Yes.
John,
Aye.
Emily,
Aye.
Aaron,
Yes.
Elizabeth, Scott.
Aye.
Thank you all.
And I'm an
Okay.
aye too.
Sorry.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, Patrick, you're here?
No, it's Mark.
Oh,
Mark.
Mark. Sorry, Mark. Did I? Sorry. Okay. Good.
Dan Mark is the new member of our committee. You haven't met him before, I don't think, but he's relatively new. You'll get to know his face.
We seem to be wired in a similar way, so I suspect you're right.
You might even run into him at town hall.
Well, I appreciate the humor on this day. Anyway, I think we successfully navigated that. The next order of business is kind of, there are a series of questions are all kind of related. They were I love the fact that Shannon kind of put them in pretty much word for word as I set them up. I was thinking we might even make them even that much more refined, but I think this gets to the point. And it's really a conversation about and an opportunity for the full board to say, where are we? And how much consensus is there around that and what comes next? And so to sort of take this moment, we've all been, thanks to the very effective and hard work that our consulting team did, agency, and Kate and Rhiannon and Justina and everyone else. We made it through the sprint, and we did in fact deliver on that expectation. And equally important, I think it's now an appropriate time to sort of consider, take breath and think about, is this where we thought we would be? Is this where we need to be? And either way, what comes next. So I'm happy to kind of facilitate a conversation, but that's really the thought process that led to this moment. And I don't know if Kate, Rhiannon, and or Justina have anything they'd like to say to help sort of from their perspective.
Yeah.
If not, okay, Kate.
Thanks, Dan. Yes,
Yes.
we wouldn't come, it wouldn't be agency style if we didn't come to this meeting with a slide deck. So of course we have a slide deck if you all are interested, that frames some of, Dan, what you're talking about a little bit now, and happy to do that now or do that whenever it's appropriate, given the discussion agenda items.
Okay.
It's short. It's very.
Do
yeah.
folks generally feel like that would be helpful to see what agency has prepared for this?
Yes.
All right, let's do it.
Right. This one's much shorter than the other one, so hopefully it's not. Will not be too overwhelming. It's June 30th. It is the last day of our work together, which is bittersweet in a lot of ways. But so what we wanted to do together today was first acknowledge that this is a very short slide deck, and in part because we are deeply embedded in finalizing the final deliverables for you all, and so that includes about I think an 80-page what we were calling an executive summary. It feels less of an executive summary at this point, but an 80-page document that summarizes all of the work, and then a much longer compendium of appendices that are white page memos from all of the various consultants. So this slide deck is short in part because there are a few questions we still have for you all that we want to dig into together. And then we also want to share a few additional pieces of information that have made their way into the report document so that you understand them, that we set expectations around them, and so they aren't surprises when you see them in the document that we send this evening. So it goes without reminding that, as Dan said, we're at the end of our sprint. We're ready to trade in our running shoes for our walking shoes, and also really excited for you all to see the final document. And so there are a couple of things that we've been working on that we want to remind this group of. The document is filled with a lot of technical information, but it's also very much about continuing to communicate the vision. And so this is the cover of that plan. We're calling it a vision plan because it from the beginning it has been a document that is meant to reflect community desires, Concordians' desires against the realities, physical realities of the site and the market realities of the site and this region. And so we shared this with you all last week, but the structure of the document includes acknowledgements, a table of contents, as well as a series of chapters. And those chapters include an introduction. They include a summary of what we learned from the existing conditions analysis. They include the vision, which we'll show you in a moment, as well as a deeper dive into what we're calling the site framework and the scenarios. The last piece, which is what we want to spend time discussing with you all around and what is in the agenda for today's meeting, is next steps. Where do we go from here? And so this is a very lengthy slide, lengthy narrative slide, but we've highlighted some of the important pieces to really capture what the vision is meant to include. And so the way that we've written it is that the vision for this site is anchored in a commitment to the many voices that contributed to this effort, where reinvestment leans into so many stories of the site, the histories of the site, as well as community desires to build new stories and experiences for a more sustainable and vibrant future. And that outcome is really based on a vision that you all had started to assemble before we were engaged in this effort. And that was an outcome that was described through a series of goals. And those goals were about creating a sustainable multi-use development that balances those histories, that balances that change with tradition, and then also at the same time incorporates a balance of green space, mobility considerations and innovation, so that it can support not just the town, not just its residents, but also visitors. And then we've shared this with you all last
Sorry,
week as
Rhiannon, can
well.
I make one comment?
Yes, of course.
Just go back one.
Go for it.
Just maybe this is more technical, but the outcome is really a vision for a sustainable development. It's not a development itself.
Yep, that is
Mhm.
true.
That's true.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have a magic wand. So yes, we'll go ahead and make that update. Any other thoughts before we move on? So we shared this last Monday as well, but we've been revising and tweaking the principles for the future development that really, pull in each different elements of those vision statements that the former MCI Concord site needs to be a green habitat along the Assabet. It's a uniquely Concord destination. It's a place to live and thrive. It's also a regional draw and a boon to the region, as well as a significant contributor to the town of Concord. And so this is some information that we've talked about all along, but I think Linda had referenced this in our conversation last Monday, and so wanted to revisit it. Just being clear what the opportunities and constraints of the site are. We will be walking through that in the document so that someone who hasn't been following along for each of these Zoom meetings or hasn't been participating in public workshops can pick up this document and can situate themselves within the context of what the vision is and what the challenges of the sites are. And so we also describe or detail and try to do so in a clear and accessible way. What are the kind of steps that are associated with new development? Elizabeth, did you have a question?
I didn't, I was just drinking water.
Oh, no, gotta love Zoom.
It was Elizabeth Hughes, actually.
So for number 5,
Elizabeth Hughes has a question, sorry.
Ah, okay,
yeah.
that makes sense.
number 5, that's not correct.
Number
So
5, okay.
Junction Village site has housing on that has nothing to do with the MBTA communities process.
Okay,
So
we can go ahead and make that tweak.
yeah, so number 5 Junction Village, that was part of a land swap. And Junction Village was included in the MBTA communities overlay district, but
Right.
so if you back up a slide, that's not the previous slide and this slide.
Yeah.
That's not a site constraint or the reason that housing is on Junction Village.
Okay, that's helpful.
So this could read housing requirement or something
Yeah.
instead of MBTA communities, Elizabeth?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
We'll do that.
yep,
That tweak.
Thank
thanks
you.
for
Sorry.
flagging that. Yeah,
Sorry to
really appreciate it.
Clarification.
Yep,
Yeah, and I believe that is communicated that way in the memos that we have as well as in the report document, but we'll just make sure before we submit that. So, and then, it's also really important that we not just share each of the scenarios in a vacuum, but that we are consistently highlighting how each of the scenarios relate to the various metrics that we had identified together with you all. And so you'll see in the document that there are a series of pages that start by communicating the metrics or the constraints that were defined to inform this work. And then each of the scenarios is shared along a spectrum of how much they achieve from the perspective of financial feasibility. So that internal rate of return versus something like housing density. How do each of the scenarios how do each of the scenarios compare as it relates to each other, and as it relates to, opportunities to also make sure that they can offset any impacts to infrastructure like school capacity, while also comparing themselves to other communities, either within Concord or around Concord, like Brookside Square, Concord Green, or Concord Mill Run. We also, within these sections, and we try to do this throughout the document, it's not just a communication of, what was found through the technical analysis and through conversations with key stakeholders like the school district, but also, communicating various engagement outcomes that provide a qualitative lens to what is otherwise a very quantitative document.
So as Rhiannon shared, we're, today at this pivot point where we're exchanging our sprinting shoes for walking shoes. And I think we all recognize that the ultimate goal is to get to a place where somebody's putting on construction boots and really making and implementing change on this site. And so the next 3 slides are just starting to articulate what Dan, I think, was asking about what the immediate next steps are, and where do we want to, how do we chart a course towards bringing the vision to life. So big picture, the document that we've been describing to you and the process we've gone through and what you're going to read in your inboxes this evening is a vision plan that articulates the 3 scenarios and a lot of different criteria and opportunity to unpack how to make a decision. And so there's going to be a process needed to help socialize those decisions and pull from the strengths of these scenarios into one refined vision that can be implementable and moved forward, actionable. So we have a few immediate next steps defined on the next slide here. So I think if we think about the short-term time frame here, there's a real need to continue to socialize these 3 scenarios. And make sure that the town feels good about the decision in front of them and how to make a good decision that can be actionable. So in the immediate term, that means not losing momentum. So in July, over the course of the next month, creating a schedule with these key milestones for project next steps. When do you want to tackle the tasks that are remaining, and how do we move towards something that's actionable? So creating that schedule, reconfirming any goals and the role of your advisory board as you move forward. You now have this vision plan in place. What is your role this summer and beyond? And then continuing the coordination. And there's active coordination ongoing with Mass DOT, conversations about the integration of other projects, as well as the DCAM and their thinking about disposing of the site. Meanwhile, I think there's a real need to share the plan outcomes more broadly. There's been a great momentum around community engagement and process over the course of the spring with the 5 different events and stakeholder meetings that you all have led. And so there's a need to shop around the final plan, create buy-in and good conversations with stakeholders and the broader community. Some of that could happen through updating the website. We think there's value in assembling a slide deck that's kind of the greatest hits that you could use to take the show on the road to different committees and stakeholder groups, and consider some sort of collateral that could be left behind that helps people know where to find information and how to continue to add their voice to the process.
Quick question.
We're all working.
Will you guys
Yeah,
be
go
able
ahead.
to,
Yep.
will you guys be able to kind of provide a little training for the community outreach subcommittee or Shannon or others, just to make sure that we know how to take care of the website, hand off those passwords, et cetera?
Of course,
We can.
yes,
Yep.
you're prepared.
Yep. Good question, John.
Thanks.
Yep. And so all this is working towards, looking ahead a little bit beyond July and this summer, thinking that, in the rest of 2025, you all had already identified that there's a need to, craft that preferred site vision and program mix. So take what you hear as you shop things around this summer and land one final preferred site vision, which could be a hybrid of many aspects of the scenarios. And then draft that zoning ordinance and zoning maps. And again, continue to socialize what that thinking is in order to vote on the zoning in early 2026 and initiate the process of disposing of the site alongside DCAM. 2028 and beyond is really where that design and permitting process begins, and the potential for construction, the boots on the ground. So Dan, I think you had asked us to just sort of frame up the conversation. I think we see that there could be some additional conversations to clarify, some of the vision and the structure of the document that Rhiannon shared, but I think there's also some good content to dig into here with you all about what the next steps are. And, John, to your question, how agency can best support you all as we transition at this moment.
Thank you, Kate and Rhiannon. My question, the one that immediately comes to mind is, what else? I guess I don't want to assume anything, but my sense, I guess I might be a little bit surprised if there is a consensus among the advisory board yet on which scenario to pursue. And maybe I should ask that as a question among people just to sort of hear, because in one scenario, if we're all on board with a particular vision, one of those three visions, then then it really becomes more about what Kate was saying, that socializing it and going on to the next steps. And if we think we need some more time with it, then what do we need from the agency folks and anyone else to try to begin to coalesce around a decision? What would be helpful? So that's kind of, to me, we're in this moment of trying to figure out collectively where we think we're at.
Dan, I got a thought, if I may.
Sure.
Kind of coming back to our core charge, right, which is to advise the select board on the best reuse for the site. I do think we do need to reach consensus as an advisory board on what the right scenario is to pursue. I don't know. I think we have to talk about how kind of firm or rigid versus flexible that might be, kind of what form that takes. Personally, there are some things, I forget what you call the things where you had 5 to 10 things for each scenario that people could say what they liked. I think in the last meeting, someone said, well, could we see a rank? I think it was Dan said it could be see like a rank ordering of them all. Personally, I'd like to go through the process myself of kind of picking through some of those things and kind of put together what I think would be a good scenario. Because I think that the 3 scenarios directionally, each one is distinct and has a different set of kind of inputs and outputs. But I think that ultimately we may conclude that there are certain elements that we like from each of them, right? So that, I think, Dan, is where the challenge is for us as a board to figure out how we get from here with all the wealth of information agency's going to leave us with and get to consensus on a set of recommendations for the select board.
Very well articulated, John, and I agree with that. And what comes up for me when you say that is, what do we need? What additionally do we need? What else do we need to help us make that decision? For example, it occurs to me that just anecdotally listening to various people's advisory board members' comments on some of the scenarios, there seemed to be a diversion around what would be appropriate number of housing units, which for me is kind of a density question, right? And so would it be helpful? I'm just brainstorming. Would it be helpful for the agency team to give us some different visuals or other tools that will help us look at what these various densities would actually mean on the ground, either with precedents or some other things that people might need? That's one example. Or is it just a matter, as you mentioned, John, is it's just a matter of us all collectively spending time with what's going to be a very robust report, very dense, with a lot of information, and then beginning to think about the guiding principles. We had a whole bunch of different names, success criteria at different points. How do we apply some logic to getting to a preferred scheme, whether it's a hybrid or otherwise? And before I finish that thought, I just want to add this too, because there's another question. I'm sorry for loading up a bunch of questions, but do we feel like we've got adequate input? You know, John, and you guys have done a great job supported with agency. And, you know, when I stop and think about it personally, that even though we're hearing from the agency folks that it's actually pretty remarkable engagement. When I think of 350 people out of 18,000 people, roughly, you know, that seems like a recipe for somebody or many people at a point saying, no one ever told me about this. And I suspect, given everyone that's involved in this committee, you have been in a situation where people feel like nobody talked to us. And I see Linda's hand up.
Yeah. Dan, you haven't heard of town meeting? Town meeting's been around 350 years and gets 400 people. We've been around 1 year and we got 350 plus. I think
That's
we're doing
true. That's a great way to look at it, John. I like that. So, and it may be as good as we can get. And I don't want to judge it. I just want to ask the question. Linda, you have your hand up.
And I apologize, Linda, is it okay if I just quickly say something in response to Dan's? Is it okay?
Of course.
I think that it's really important too that we acknowledge that the outreach subcommittee had us send out postcards to every household in Concord too. So everyone had the opportunity to participate. They made the choice whether or not they had the time or resources or ability to participate, but they had the opportunity to participate. So we shouldn't mistake the amount of participation with the understanding that this was happening. I think is a really important point too. Sorry, Linda. Thank you for letting me.
Good point. Sorry, Linda.
Well, I was just going to comment that this has been truly a sprint. It has been amazing to watch. I mean, it's just like unbelievable what has been accomplished. But then I asked myself, is this not really, now we're engaged in a marathon and bringing in other items that could be constraints in terms of understanding some of the details of the site, in terms of the direction the town will be going with the wastewater treatment plant, and also what's going on with DOT. So, you know, to accomplish what we want with a solidified vision in this process with other actors that are going at a different pace. I mean, one question I have is it necessary to go in this next phase at the same lightning speed that we've been at, or do we really now have to engage more with those other constraints and variables before we get to a final proposal for town meeting? And I'm a great believer in having deadlines. They really do create value in the process. But I want to make sure that, everyone understands that if we have an artificial deadline of we have to be on, April town meeting or whatever it will be this year, is that the best process to get the best result for the community? So that's a question I have at this juncture as we move forward.
So if I could, Aaron, I see your hand is up, but if I could just try to respond to that. There's a couple of inputs that I think might be helpful for everyone to hear. One of them relates to DCAM, and their sort of sense of timing. And they're very hard to pin down, for probably for good reasons. That said, Paul acknowledged that this was a sprint. There's a lot of information to digest, and that there's nothing sort of hard and fast. The other piece of that is beginning to think about the disposition. And so almost in a separate but parallel track, I think it would be good. And Mark and I have talked about this a little bit as well, and Patrick, that we should, we chatted with the agency folks, to maybe that notion of developing a schedule, that's sort of from here to the next milestone might be helpful for all of us, because if you're anything like me, there's probably a little bit of anxiousness about, we don't want anyone to get ahead of us on that, in that process. We want to make sure we're prepared. And at the same time, I think it's in all of our collective interest to be very clear about what path we are pursuing, so that we can do that intelligently. And so that's kind of my response to your points, Linda.
Thank you.
Sorry, Erin.
I was going to ask the same thing. I think had we not been driven by the state's financial timeline, we probably would have made this process a little longer, and gotten more opportunity for input and analysis. And then I was also going to say, I think the next phase will be driven by how quickly DCAM is moving with their process, and how do we need to fit into that, and similar to what you said, Dan.
Thanks. Elizabeth?
So to that point, it's probably useful to share what MassDOT said at our last meeting, which was, now I'm forgetting what day it was. They're on a 5-year design schedule, right? They have money to do the first initial design phase, which they said will take, Dan, you can correct me, I think their words were, will be done by 2030. Is that, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So, and DCAM to that point understands, I mean, it's pretty hard to dispose of a property or get any major, figuring out where the access is gonna be or what's going on. So I think Paul made that point that they're gonna have to figure out how disposition works. I kind of am, to Linda's point, agree. I think it's pretty hard. So maybe someone can explain to me better how it would work, putting something out to a developer where we haven't figured out what's happening with any of that roadway. I mean, who's gonna take on a whole property like that? And I don't think we want it done piecemeal, but maybe I'm wrong.
John, do you have something related to that, or can I respond to it?
You can respond, please.
Okay. It's a good question. It's not an unusual circumstance to be in, especially with properties that have this kind of adjacency to major transit assets like that. And so the developer the developer's going to do what the developer wants to do. But that said, they'll make certain set of assumptions about how the access might work. And there was some, as you were there, I mean, there was some conversations about, we shared agencies' visions and the possibilities, and what we even pressed them a little bit. I think we all did, and pressed them in saying, is there a better way to do this in light of that timeline? I think it was your question, Elizabeth, initially. And because how do we do this in a way that makes sense, and we don't kind of end up feeling like we're throwing a monkey wrench at the 11th hour? And so I think there's it was an interesting meeting with them, in that I think from their priorities, perhaps not surprisingly from anyone on this call, but their priorities are through traffic on Route 2, and as unimpeded and as efficient as possible. And their vision on that is, okay, you're going to separate the link between Commonwealth Ave and 2A, and that's going to make life 100% better for us. And so, or 1,000% better for us. So that being able for them to have a chance to start to look at the scenarios, I think was eye-opening for them. And as, traffic engineers, they don't like to do anything very quickly, and they don't like to, they like to design as much as possible for what they think the realities are going to be. And so I think we are doing, long story short, I think we're doing everything, and the agency team is doing everything we possibly can by having these quarterly meetings and sharing with them. And so that's a long rambling, perhaps not even a good response to the question, but
No, it's kind of an ambiguous question, but I mean, if we're going for zoning and we don't know exactly what I know we're talking about doing big blocks, but what was striking to me in that conversation was that they're pretty much saying, in my opinion, thank you. This is interesting information. We're going to do what we're going to do. And
Mhm.
whether or not that's what we want them to do. So just to put that on the table.
So Dan, I had a bunch of thoughts. Just first of all, I think Linda's characterization of moving from sprint to marathon, spot on. That's a great way to think of it, because I do think this is going to be a many-year marathon, not necessarily for this advisory board, but for the project. And I think that, Dan saying that nothing is going to be hard and fast on our recommendations, I think that's true too. I mean, things are going to change. Whatever we end up recommending is based on our current knowledge, and no doubt we will continue to learn new things. Like I just learned that it's going to be 5 years before DOT has a design. Wow. I mean, that could change things, right? And so I think, we're going to continue to learn other things. I mean, remediation is still a big topic we don't know nearly enough about. And we may actually decide, or the planning board may decide, that there's not enough certainty to actually move forward with a zoning proposal for next town meeting. Who knows, right? But I think all we can do is make our best recommendation at the time, and acknowledge that may change as new information comes to the table. And that's really the best thing we can do. But, to the thing about community, about input from the community, do we have enough? I think we got probably about as much as we reasonably could have gotten in such a short period of time. But I would imagine there will continue to be input from the community. And there's no telling that we're not going to get some amazing idea 30 or 60 or 90 days from now, right? So I think, we need to continue to be set up to listen and channel that information, to the select board over time.
Great comments, John. Emily?
Yeah, so I think just building off of sort of what John is saying makes me think about, how specific do we want to be in our recommendations, right? I mean, I think we want to be specific enough in the types of, commercial, residential, but perhaps provide a range or not even a range, right? I mean, if we're presenting something that's going to be developed tomorrow, that's different. 5-7 years from now, the picture of housing in Concord might be much different, right? There's 3 other sites that could have been determined and under development. So I don't think as a board that we should be very, overly prescriptive in what we want. Instead, kind of an aggregation of the community's feedback, which is extremely comprehensive, and they've had multiple opportunities to engage. And with sort of what our general vision is that could shape zoning, but I don't think we want to get as specific as number of units and acreage of how we would divide the site.
I think that's a great input, and I agree with you. Mark?
Thanks. For those that didn't attend the DOT meeting, it was interesting to see where they're headed, though, and the sort of the change for Commonwealth Avenue to go more west, sort of right through the parking lot. The fact that they are inclined to raise Commonwealth Avenue to be an overpass over Route 2 main corridor. That's evolving relatively quickly, I think, and they made a commitment to get back together with us in September. I think there's some additional ongoing traffic conversations that are coming. There's new traffic data coming, so there's I think the 5 years is what's going to get built version of the design, versus we could expect that in the 6 to 9 to 12 month time frame, the consensus about what the state's preference broadly is, and how compatible that is with a recommendation for reuse is going to be able to progress. I don't know if we'd be there yet, but I just wanted to sort of set that information out there a little bit.
Peter?
Yeah, thanks. This has been a great conversation so far. So I'm sort of on board with the idea that now we've got a vision to share, and that probably we should spend some of our time going back out to the community groups that, and offering, once we've got that slide deck, to go back out and present it to them, get their feedback on the vision that we've created. So that's sort of where I'm thinking we need to go in terms of next steps, while concurrently we're having our discussions about what are the right elements that we want to pull together for the advice to the select board.
I think that's actually a really interesting observation, Peter, because, for the people on this call right now, generally, it has been a sprint, right? Because we've been up close and personal, and the agency folks have been actually out there flying. I would guess, just speculation, that a bunch of people in the town are probably like, well, what's taking so long? And not much has happened, right? And so I think that if I understand what you're suggesting, there's an opportunity to, I guess, socialize. That's a good word. It's just to share more of this with people so they understand that we actually have given all these things a lot of thought, and give people an opportunity. A bunch of people may not even understand some of the issues and some of the things that have been applied to this, to make sure that they're good ideas. And I think that's an opportunity for conversation and more engagement. So I like that idea. And I like this idea of I forget what term was it used, but our slide deck of, the highlights, or the reel, or whatever. You had a good word for it, but okay. So I guess what I'm still thinking about, so trying to pick up on what Emily was suggesting, is there value in, or do we feel it would be helpful if we have and also what John was suggesting, because what I heard with John is we could pick the best of all those worlds, and I really like that idea, and that makes sense. And so the question is, do we, is there a point of intersection between, Emily, your suggestion and John's suggestion? Because I heard them slightly different. That John's saying we could sort of mix and match, and what I heard you saying is, yes, also let's not be too prescriptive, which I get the relationship with that. But how do you talk about these things with people? If you're trying, and how do you, maybe we don't even need to distinguish between them, but for me, it seems it would be hard to sort of control that. If you suddenly have 1, 2, 3, and 1A, 1, 2, 2A, 3A kind of thing.
Dan, what if we did this? And first of all, I have a question. I believe town meeting approved some funds for us in the next fiscal year. Is it possible that agency would be able to stick around or would come back? And if they were able to come back, is that months away, or is that something that could be enabled to happen like, July 1st?
So if Mark is still here, I'm going to attempt to answer, and he'll correct me if I'm right. And also Megan is here. Megan, you want to answer that?
Yes, I think that's a good question. It's been something I've been thinking about a lot, and I've had to tee this up as an option for the advisory board. And so we originally did a procurement for 6 tasks, right? So we contracted for tasks 1 through 4. We have identified tasks 5 and 6 for a future date. What I think we're talking about here is like 4A. There's more work that we need to do before we think about contracting for
tasks 5 and 6. And so in our, in procurement, we have the ability to extend a contract for up to 25%. So there is an amount of work that we could extend this contract for to do this summer, or, whenever appropriate, prior to contracting for those final 2 zoning related tasks. I think, when could we do it? It wouldn't be months and months away. It's not a full procurement process, but it would include a change order for the contract. And to do that, I just need to have we need to have a clear understanding of what that entails, and discuss that with agency, kind of capture exactly what that is. And I was hoping, if not in this meeting, then another meeting soon, we can have, or with a subgroup, we can have a more specific conversation about what exactly are we looking for to accomplish in this chunk of work, so that we can make it happen. Because yes, those funds were appropriated at town meeting, which were, brought forward by the select board under Mark's leadership for this specific purpose. It's like, what else do we need to get to these next steps? Mark, feel free to, if you have other thoughts, to chime in there. I think if I didn't capture it.
No, perfect. Thank you, Megan.
Yeah, and in our conversation, Megan, about that, you had a couple of just examples of things that we might want to do, which have already been mentioned, but this idea of maybe putting together a schedule, a calendar, right? And thinking about things like annual town meetings in that respect, but also disposition considerations and the clarity around the wastewater treatment. Maybe if we're correct, and Elizabeth correct, that we can start to get even more clarity from DOT over the next 9-12 months, all those kind of things would be inputs on that, and might help us.
It seems to me like if we have this mechanism for continuing with agency, which is awesome, and I don't know what agency's plans are for the summer, but it might be, maybe we kind of, step one is for us as a committee to put together kind of scope of work 4A, whatever it's called. And that may well be just making sure that we have an opportunity to clarify, kind of dig into, et cetera, all the stuff they've done, as we try to come up with our consensus vision on what to bring to the select board. In that way, because I think we all need to read the report, have a little time to think about it, and come back somehow and maybe present our own particular syntheses, or our own, maybe each of us brings our own preferred optimal scenario, something like that.
I think that's great, John. My question to you, follow-up question to you, would be, and it's to everybody. Do we do that in the context of the 3 subcommittees, or do we do it as individual advisory board members? Do people have thoughts on that?
I'd probably do it as individuals. I mean, I think that, yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, the timing is great. We're going to get this the night before, the eve of July 1st, and we have all this time over the holiday to be reading the report. And then the question, I guess, is, do we want to try to get back together again on the 14th? Is that too soon? Or does that feel about right? I am sensitive to this point about, not losing momentum. I suspect you all are. I also want to be sensitive to people's summer schedules. Paul, I think I've said this before, but I don't want to take anything for granted. DCAM wants to know how they can be helpful and what we want from them over the summer. And is it possible that come September, we might be in a position for them to do another public outreach? I don't think we can answer that right now, but that's the kind of things that they're thinking about, that they're looking for feedback from us. I see Erin has her hand up.
Yeah, I think that was going to be my question, Dan. What is DCAM planning? What do they want to do? We haven't obviously spoken with Paul directly in a while, so what is their timeline? Are they just waiting for us to tell them when we're ready, or presumably, we've reached a year now since DOC was going to be moving out of the facility. Is that happening? Have they taken over maintenance of the facility? What's the status of the site?
So I'll answer the first part of that question first. If we had not usurped the community engagements meeting today, I think the expectation, when I chatted with Paul about this a couple of weeks ago, I said, well, and before I knew we were going to do this, I said, um, there's a meeting scheduled for today with the community and engagement, and I suspect they'll be able to be from that, they'll have a better idea of what they want to need. Now that we've had this, like I said, we can, I think we can accomplish the same thing. It just might get pushed out, bumped out a couple of weeks. And I think, in fact, it'll be better because we'll have a clearer idea of what if anything they can be doing. I see Scott.
Yeah, hey Dan, I was curious to know, I'd love to hear from Paul and DCAM, his thoughts on timing, considering our site constraints with DOT and the wastewater treatment facility. Can they go out to an RFP in the next year or two, or do they have to wait for a full detailed design and confirmation of the design for the rotary, as well as understanding what's going on with the wastewater treatment facility? I'd be curious to know how these site constraints affect the timing for DCAM and the master developer RFP.
Okay. I can follow up with him on that. My answer right now would be kind of vague, so. And the vague answer would be, just kind of leave people hanging on that, is that he recognized, I said this a little bit earlier, I think, in the call, but he recognized that there are these moving parts and that they're not going to force the situation when it's not quite ready. And he said that with different words and the words that you would imagine someone from DCAM would say, which is they don't want to take their foot off the accelerator, and at the same time they're acknowledging that there's a bunch of questions. I'm sorry, Emily?
Yeah, just kind of, I guess, coming back to, as we are thinking, I guess, individually of what our recommendations are. I mean, the other kind of major decision, and I don't know how much of this is really in our control, but is, are we going to make a recommendation to the select board that, we want to purchase the site from DCAM and dispose of it ourselves? Or, are we okay with DCAM going out for an RFP and disposing it? Can the town bid on an RFP? I mean, that's kind of like the elephant in the room, right? I mean, we can make all these, we can share our vision of what we want the site to be at the end of the day, but how do we want to get there? And I'm not sure, how much of that is really in our control, but I'm just wondering if that needs to be part of our recommendation and discussion with the select board.
Yeah, and I have a couple of different responses to that. Mark and I had talked about this a little bit, with the possibility of having a conversation with the select board about that point and about what some of the different options are, and maybe even doing it in an executive session, just because obviously there's some sensitivity to that. That said, and now I'm speaking maybe a little bit out of school, but if we could, I think in some respects, if we could wave our magic wand and money were not an object, I think it comes back to the point that you made, Emily. I think things are going, and John made for sure, that things are going to change over time. And so if you could land bank this site, that would be awesome, right? Because you could kind of dispense it and dispose of it over time with parcels or whatever, and that might be ultimately the best outcome. I don't really know how we get there, and I don't even know if it's realistic, but that's something that I think we would discuss and explore in the conversation about disposition strategies. And so it's another moving target in our set of tasks.
But that's the kind of question I think will come out of this next couple of weeks of just reflection on what agencies put together, right? We may decide that it's a priority to figure out how the town actually, can take control and land bank the property, right? That may be one of our recommendations. But again, we haven't had the chance to kind of to pull up from all the sprint work and actually kind of remind ourselves of the long-term objectives and exactly kind of what the different paths for getting there might be.
Yeah.
So I mean, I agree. If we could wave a magic wand and just take complete control of the site, that would be awesome. Now, would we want to have to be responsible for all the remediation? I don't know. But, you know, conditionally controlling it, yeah, that sounds great.
Right. Right. Well, the other thing that I feel like has progressed, and Emily, I don't know if you're party to this. I don't remember if I've shared this with people, but you know, I feel like what moved a little bit over the course of our work is, and I think it's a function of the ideas that were thrown out, and I think good ideas, but the possibility of doing transfer of development rights. So taking other parcels that the town is working and trying to figure out how to do some of these other elements on them, whether it's housing or whatever, there seemed to be more receptivity than when we began. And so I think that's all part of the disposition conversation and consideration and brainstorming. But I think there's some interesting possibilities in that, right? So and we kind of need it's a three-dimensional moving puzzle because we need the work that I think Megan's doing with the land use piece and you know how all these different things kind of fit together. And so planning would be really easy if you could just, you know, hit the pause button. Time weren't a consideration in some respects. And maybe that's got a bad side to it too, I'm guessing. But all right. So in terms of, sorry.
I just wanted to make the comment that I would encourage individual reflection, as John mentioned, and then I think some real engagement, preferably in person with the board, trying to develop what the ideal strategies and schedule is. I think that a lot of people have come to the table, DOT, DCAM, you know, Department of Correction, in the state with their ideas of what the ideal schedule is, but this is land in Concord, and I think we have a say about that too. And so we shouldn't be shy about saying this is the schedule that looks like it's going to work for us, and these are the kind of outcomes that we're striving for. The select board put together this board because we felt that there was a lot of expertise to be tapped, and I'm looking for that engagement to really begin now. This has been the warm up, the fodder for that mill, but the mill hasn't started running yet from my perspective. So I would say we should take the summer to figure that out. I think we should get some additional support. I like the idea of being able to go back and ask questions. I also think that, you know, if there's a consolidated vision that or consensus vision that can be articulated, then absolutely sharing that across the community and seeing it is important. Just an aside, as long as I have the floor, I was on the site of Medfield State Hospital yesterday and looked at, you know, those buildings that have been boarded up for 20 years. And, you know, that's just beginning to come together as an art center now with a vision for the community. And so I'm sure that nobody really wants to see this sitting for 20 years. I think we can all agree to that, but we also don't have to really jump to the first thing that comes to mind in 12 months either. So that would be what we're looking for. The last thing I'll remind us of before I let the discussion move on is, you know, we are also engaged in a negotiation, or the beginnings of a negotiation over the wastewater treatment facility, and that is on a slightly different track. And somehow we need to figure out how that schedule or intention also feeds into this. And I think that needs to be done with some intention, and I'm hoping that we'll also engage in that conversation to try and figure out how critical it is to know what the capacity capabilities are there, and what the town should be negotiating for when it contemplates taking over that facility.
Points. Peter?
Yeah, I just had a question. Does Department of Corrections transfer the property to DCAM tomorrow, July 1st?
Yes, that's what they said they were going to do. The last time we talked to Paul, which I think was about a week ago.
Okay, so that's one less player out there to coordinate with.
Yeah, so on that same topic of DCAM, it would be interesting to better understand kind of what would constitute a win for them if they could kind of quote unquote unload this on the town of Concord, while retaining responsibility for any kind of hazardous remediation, for example. Would they like that, right? Or, because I think that my understanding is they want to see this property reused in a productive manner consistent with the state's policies, their policy goals. If they think that that's a faster path to get in there, is that something they would even consider? Because we have never really discussed that with them, whether they would be willing to do that. The Elizabeth Acres more buy it for a buck idea that we were talking about 9 months ago.
It's a good point. So let me ask this question. Does 2 weeks feel like enough to do this individual deep dive, given the holidays in the middle of that for a meeting, or does that feel too soon? I think the reason I'm asking that is ideally, and several people have said this, we want to continue the working relationship. We want to be able to extend the relationship with agency, and the sooner we can get Megan a scope of work and she can put together a change order, the sooner that can happen in our work. So I almost feel like it would be nice to two-track it, because if we felt comfortable of 2 weeks from now saying, okay, here's what it's going to be, then we could today brainstorm some items if people have clarity around that. I imagine you probably want to look at the report first, but I'm allowing for any possibility. If we think we could, even as rough categories, we could give Megan something now, then we could keep those things happening at the same time. Or if we want to take the 2 weeks, that'd probably be okay too.
Yeah, I suspect that the chairs probably have enough information to draft a step 4A scope of work. Maybe, I don't know if we have to brainstorm that together, but
when you say chairs, John, just so I can clarify, you're talking about the three subcommittees, or Patrick and I?
Patrick, whomever. I mean, some group of us could probably pull it together in time to do that. I think. So I think maybe if we said that the agenda for the 14th were to basically agree and kind of bless a revised scope of work, I think that's a reasonable thing to get ready, and it would allow us to continue some momentum and also maximize the possibility that we'd be able to get agency back in the relatively near future, as opposed to running the risk that we'd wait till September and then we all forget where MCI Concord is,
I like that idea a lot. And so reading the report, taking a first pass at, this is what I heard. Just correct me if it's wrong. Take a first pass at a revised scope of work. And maybe in the course of reading it, we're going to identify areas which obviously would inform the scope of work, the areas that we want to drill down a little deeper or have more questions about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
Okay, if people are comfortable with that, I think that's great. So it sounds like we'll plan to schedule. Linda, did you have a question or comment?
This is sort of predates this to-do list, but I wanted to say, because I didn't realize that DCAM will now be in charge of the site. And if you would ask them, would they allow tours? Because I think if you want community input, that's what everybody would want, to come to. So again, we could get the same 350 people that we've heard from already, but I think if we want to bring in people and get more input, that would be huge. Just a comment.
It's a great point. And I can ask that at the next coordination meeting. Okay. So,
I think a tour would be an awesome way to roll out a new vision for the place.
mhm.
That would get real interest.
Yeah, you could start to imagine placing boards and things like, you could actually have a work session out there and walk people around.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna unless someone objects, I'm gonna request that Shannon put on the schedule a meeting on the 14th, 2 weeks from today. With that sort of the individual responsibilities that we talked about. Are there any other items around this that people want to talk about?
Just, I guess, one general comment in terms of the summer schedule. I'm respectful of the fact that, people have plans in summer, and I will say I'm going to be away much of the summer. So in-person meetings for me are going to be hard, but we might invite people to share their honest preferences for meetings directly with Shannon. And then she can share that with Dan and Patrick, and then you guys can figure out, what a realistic meeting schedule is.
That's a great idea, John. Okay. Elizabeth?
Understanding that this isn't environmentally friendly, is there a possibility of getting a hard copy of the report? Or are we all just getting it sent out to us?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm gonna try to do it electronically, but is that a Rhiannon or Justina question?
I guess the question is, could I get a hard copy?
Yeah, we can get a hard
Wow.
copy. I was just thinking,
Okay.
I'm like, I'd love to use the state funds for that. But I need to get a printing invoice today. So I'll see when I get the report. Otherwise,
Okay.
we can, yeah.
Maybe just of the report and not all the appendices.
Yeah, we can
at least.
definitely make sure you all
Okay.
have reports.
Cool, thank you.
Maybe. Sorry.
Oh, just that, Megan, we can share with you the number of pages, and you could ask for an estimate as an invoice.
That's a great idea.
Great.
Yeah. I was thinking that it would be good to have a copy in somewhere maybe around you, Megan, and then so if somebody wants to stop in and touch pages
Yeah.
and feel it, that
I think
that
that's
would be
good
good.
to have some copies.
Yeah. Okay. Linda?
Copies for the libraries.
Great idea.
Yep. Linda? You're muted, Linda.
I'm a little confused because the discussion we had last week about getting the report, at that point, it seemed like we were going to have a period of time that feedback would come from the advisory board, and like the report wouldn't be distributed broadly. It would be our feedback in terms of issues like Elizabeth brought up about the MBTA communities, et cetera, and so I guess I'm concerned about printing and printing costs and how many copies you're going to print and who's going to be between now and the 14th. And are we giving feedback at that time in terms of any issues we have with the report? Is this a first draft? Is this the final report? I'm just a little lost in terms of what we had talked about last Monday and what I'm sort of hearing now. So could we have some clarification?
I'm going to turn that to Justina and/or Rhiannon.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I think Linda, to your point, I think we feel the same, which is that if possible, it would be beneficial for this advisory board to review the document first. That you could print it, but that you share it only amongst yourselves for now. And that anything that goes to a library or anything that's shared more broadly happens after you've had a chance to to review it and to identify any lightning rod issues or challenges.
So when do you want the comments? Is the 14th the time to get comments to you, or I
interpret it a little bit differently. I think this is their final report for this this phase of work, right? So once they give us this report today or whatever electronically, then that's the final piece of work. That may, I would imagine, change over time as we continue to kind of think through or learn more things, et cetera. But correct me if I'm wrong. The agency is not available tomorrow to make any tweaks. Like what they're giving us is their final draft.
John, that's true. I mean, I think that I imagine that if you all are revisiting this on the 14th together, and that's your moment to have read the report and talked about scope of work pieces, is that could be the moment to just say, like, what are the things that need to be edited as part of the report, if anything needs to be edited as part of the report before it goes to the public. But I do still feel strongly that you all should become comfortable with the report before it goes to the broader public, so that if questions come to you, you understand it, you know what it includes, what it doesn't include, and can speak to it if needed.
And is your report that you'll deliver us today, is that formatted for printing if you wanted to? Because what I heard from Elizabeth is Elizabeth would like to have a hard copy to read in that format. A lot of us prefer to read it in hard copy form. So maybe we get like enough hard copies for everyone in the committee of the current version. And then we can discuss it more on the 14th. We'll figure out how the report's going to evolve. And then at some point later in the summer, then we probably say to Megan, okay, let's print 50 copies or 100 or whatever the number is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember what we did with the long range plan. I think the suggestion, Peter's suggestion, to put it to the library. We definitely printed copies for the libraries. I think we had one like at the schools and something. We had them in various places around town. Harvey Wheeler, maybe.
I think the question that I'm hearing though is, do we, in this moment, your point is a good one, John. This is the final report from that phase of work. And there's it in some respects, and maybe this was true of Envision Concord as well, but it's a living document, right? And it's going to continue to get refined and revised.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's useful to have a copy. I'm just thinking out loud. I think it's probably useful to have a record copy of it at the library that someone could look at and say, well, here's where they were on the 30th of June 2025. Here's where we are now. It's a little dicey because
the difference between the long range plan and this is that the long range plan was at a certain point, it was done. Like this is the plan. It wasn't going to evolve anymore. Whereas this, the plan, the town's long-term plan for this site may well change in a week, a month, 6 months, right? So I think this will be closer to a living doc. So whatever we do print and distribute should be very clearly labeled, as of this date, and making clear it could, this will continue to evolve. So this is a living document.
Yeah. So what the one thing I'm thinking about is, you picked up on one point, Elizabeth Hughes picked up on another one, and it's a little hard because most of us are in the dark on if there are other little nits that we want to correct. At the same time, we are where we are on the calendar, so I think it's probably appropriate to produce it in its form. So I see that. Oh, Peter, did you have a question?
So thank you, Dan. So we already talked about the need to, once we have the slide deck, to go back out to the community to get input, which sort of reinforces the concept of this being a living document that we're expecting to change over time as we get information from groups like DOT and DCAM and others, and feedback from the community. So I think going ahead and printing it now and moving forward has some sense to it.
Good. I see Scott, you have
Yeah,
your hand up and then I'll come to.
I was hoping to get the report beforehand so we could run through or any kind of edits we had or questions and all that. But I think to go a final report without all of us really having a chance to review it is a little bit risky. So I'm a proponent of having some time, whether it's a week or some sort, to review it and come back with questions or edits or anything we find in it before it goes final.
Okay, Linda? You're muted again.
I agree with Scott.
Okay, okay. So, Justina and or Rhiannon, what is, you guys have a care to comment on that, or does that create a hardship or unworkable? No?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, okay.
But to Scott's point, we're sticking to submitting the document today, but we reserve the right to submit it later in the day. Just given that we want to make sure that we've crossed all of our T's and dotted all of our I's, and yeah, want to make sure we do that before we submit it to you.
By the way, my personal opinion, perhaps not the right answer, but is that if you're willing to, and it takes an extra day to really make sure that you're fully comfortable. I mean, I was a consultant for a couple of years. I know that when you put something out there that reflects your work, you want to be sure you have it as optimally accurate and beautiful as possible.
Is there an issue relative to the contractual, municipal contractual?
Yeah, we need it today. And then
So-
4A might involve, another version of this report.
Yeah.
Comments that are collected. I think that's how it will break down.
Yeah.
Okay,
Wait, I was just going to make the comment that similar to Megan. I think that in order to satisfy the requirement for the procurement so that we can spend the state's money on it, we need a deliverable today, and it needs to be clearly marked that it was delivered today. I think that there's a couple of ways to deal with changes. One is that in an extension that the town is then paying for, we could actually pay to have it modified. We could modify it itself, or in future printed copies, we could add an appendix or something that says these are corrections or changes that were found after it was submitted. But I think we do need to do that through that checkpoint. And I agree with John's point, which is this is really just where we are at a point in time. It's largely an information collection exercise, which is going to lead us to some future version, which is going to be documented, written up, and published by somebody to be determined in the future, and could look very different. I think if we knew what the DOT told us last week, it would already look different, but we don't have those time. That's just a simple example.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Elizabeth? You're muted.
So my question is, we keep talking about giving comments to this. Officially, this report is going to come from agency, right? It's not, it doesn't have our name on it. I know we keep saying we want to do edits, but it's agency's report. So I don't know, that's something to think about as we're putting our input into it. If we disagree with something that agency put in the report, it's agency's report. I mean, I wish we had had time to see it before today, but I mean, I don't know where to go from that, but I don't think it's like our speaking, it's agency speaking.
It's a good point, because it doesn't have our recommendations. It's just
Consultants, right,
it's
advisory
report.
report.
It's the result of the information gathering.
Right. Okay.
So, and just to
Yeah,
add to that,
Emily?
just depending on sort of our review of the report, we may feel, okay, we want to sort of write an addendum or an introduction to the agency's report that is from our subcommittee or our committee, right? That sort of says what's changed since, or maybe it's an ongoing update to the report, but we could sort of introduce the report with something that comes from our team.
So there is a cover, we spent a little bit of time last week talking about a review and a cover letter. We ended up simplifying it, but there is an opportunity to do precisely what you said. So I like that idea. if we see the need for that.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions among the board? No. All right, before we go, is there any public, anyone from the public that has questions or would like to make a comment? I don't see anybody. Okay, well, I would entertain a motion to end the meeting.
So moved.
Thank you, and I wish everybody a happy and healthy and fun 4th. Oh,
Agency,
okay.
thank you so much, guys. Unbelievable work. Really, really great.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Everybody,
Happy
thank you
4th
all.
of July reading.
Yeah.
Yes.
Happy 4th,
all-
everybody.